Aha, we are live. Finally, I got this camera to work. Good evening, everyone. I feel like I'm now staring up. I'm going to be leaning backwards and probably falling off my chair by the end of the tonight, simply because I'm staring up so much higher than normal. I could reach out to lower that camera, but now I'm just going to be happy that I'm starting. So good evening to you. In fact, do you know what? I am going to do it. I'm just going to get it a bit closer. There we go. Let's move that away from that wall section there as well. Good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Misiewicz, your host for tonight's property tax webinar. I'm going to be announcing a couple of new changes that's coming your way, hopefully to make it a bit more interesting, but more relevant to property tax. I was very much aware that I was doing things on mortgages and property investing as a general, and that's fine. But you've got plenty of people you can turn to for that kind of thing. So I thought I would stick to my knitting and really focus on the property tax side of things. So hopefully we're going to stick to that and get you more meaningful information around property tax and how you can mitigate that. Obviously tonight it's all about you, my good people. So if you have questions relating to property tax, then please make sure that you type in using your fingers here or prodding stick, if you like, any tax questions that you have, and hopefully I'll be able to answer those in this evening's slot. What I thought I'd do is actually just get rid of this, stop the share, just so you can see me as a whole. So there we go. Okay, so good evening, everyone, anyway. So my name is Simon Misiewicz. What I'm going to be doing tonight is in 3 sections. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint after all that now. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about tonight is the types of tax. So you should be aware of all these types of taxes in your property investment journey. There is SDLT, which, by the way, don't trust your conveyance solicitor. We have had a number of issues with solicitors getting SDLT calculations incorrect. And I rather suspect this is nothing new, and it's not likely to be getting any better anytime soon. I'm appalled by the standards that we're seeing across the board. Apologies if you're a solicitor listening to that. I'm not doing a carte blanche across everyone, but it is. I'm pretty sure you know some pretty darn bad accountants as well. But my viewpoint is that there's a lot of mistakes being made on SDLT calculations, and solicitors are trying to back themselves in a corner, justifying their inept ability. So do challenge any SDLT calculations, and what I would always say is do your own calculations and then check what they've done is correct. Like I said, we're having a lot of issues at the moment. And VAT, so if you're refurbishing your properties, then normally you're looking at a 20% VAT bill, but there are times when it can be reduced to 5% or indeed 0%. And funny enough, we've got a video about that, so I'm going to put a link up in there when this is then being recorded and dispatched. And there's obviously things like property income tax, corporation tax, if you've bought it in a limited company, and capital gains tax. And we've released another video about capital gains tax. So if you want to watch that video, that's a great video to watch in terms of how to reduce CGT. But recently, we've also done another video of the 7 mistakes of CGT, which basically means people are paying too much CGT. Yes, it's happening, people. There are people paying far too much capital gains tax. In fact, capital gains tax is optional. Please note the word. I've said it right here, loud and clear, that CGT is totally optional. Now, don't freak out here. I'm not suggesting that you sell a property and then you flee the country and don't pay it. No, 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 no. What I'm suggesting to you, good people, is that CGT is optional. And if you follow our lead, there are ways of mitigating that capital gains tax liability, and therefore you can move on to your next investment. And then obviously when we've all been and gone from this planet, HMRC haven't quite done with us yet. So there's HMRC. So as you can see, there's a plethora of types of taxes that you need to be aware of in your investment journey. So section 1 I'm going to be dealing with is in the news. I'm going to be investigating what's being said recently in the news, but more focusing on around property tax. I have been looking at mortgages and investments as a whole, and I really want to get back to tax. So that's my centerpiece now. Even in the news, I am going to be exploring that in a lot more detail. We're also going to have a look at client FAQs. So these are the questions that our clients have been asking in the past 7 days, and I'll be bringing a nice selection of those tax questions to you and the suggested solutions that we have up our sleeves. Not that we're magicians. Then we've got the YouTube FAQ. So this is whereby you should, or I'm hoping you will be, typing in your questions, your comments, your concerns, all the way through tonight's session. So that's when I come to this section, I've got a nice bunch of questions that I can answer for you pretty quickly. So that's what I'm going to be aiming to do in tonight's session, and we'll come back to that later on. So what I'm going to do now is do another share with you on our website. Well, not our website, but Google, I should say. So I'm going to move over to that now. So wherever Google is, Google Chrome, here we are. Okay, so I can see a couple of people now tuning in. So good evening to you all. Please say hi, by the way, if you're around. Nice to see you. So let's just talk about the property wire. So this is in the news now. Property wire is first off the starting blocks. And interestingly enough, it's all about stamp duty, land tax, and obviously Boris Johnson is now the PM. There's a lot of call for him to make some changes. Will he? Won't he? What do you think? Drop in the comments box below with your comment of saying, is Boris Johnson the right PM for this country? Be really interesting to know your views on this. And secondly, do you think Boris Johnson will make positive tax changes for us landlords? Or do you think, no, he will not be making positive tax changes for us landlords? Be interesting to hear your comments and views. So make sure you type in your comments right below this video, and then I will reflect on those later on. So let's talk about this. The property wire stamp duty reform is needed as tax impacts older people and buy-to-let investors. Now, we know that the 3% SDLT surcharge comes into play whenever you have a property in your own name and you're looking to buy a second property. We also know that that 3% SDLT surcharge will also apply even if you are looking to buy a new home, even if you're trying to kind of keep the old one. What the article in here, which is an interesting one, I really don't like the way that this website is built sometimes, where it covers the folder. So this is removing stamp duty for the so-called last-time buyers. Now that's an interesting phraseology, isn't it? Last-time house buyers. This is whereby we're talking about people that want to downsize their property. So they're living in a 4 or 5 bedroom house, and they wish to downsize now because their children have fled the nest, and they're happy to move into a 1, 2, 3 bedroom cottage, home, whatever. Now, the problem is that to buy that second property, if they've got buy-to-lets already elsewhere, or if they don't want to sell their current home, they're going to also pay this 3% SDLT surcharge. And what they're saying is that we're now identifying certain demographics of who this SDLT 3% surcharge is going to affect, not just the buy-to-let property investors, which was initially targeted. And I'm going to throw another one in there for you. Let's imagine that you are in a millennial. I hate that phraseology, but it's so true. Millennials. Okay, you guys listening out here, millennials, just put your earphones away for a second. I'm joking. But you guys, if you have inherited a property from your grandparents or your parents without buying your own home, let's call it buy-to-let property portfolio that you've inherited. You didn't really necessarily want these properties, but you've now got a bunch of cash, and your first choice may be to buy your own home. Okay. The problem is that you, as a millennial, as a young generation, who's not got any properties in their own name have now inherited these properties. If you now go subsequently to try and buy your own home, you are also going to be subject to this 3% SDLT surcharge. And that's the danger point, because when does this whole thing stop? Because you did not intend to go and buy that property. In fact, you just happened to inherit these properties in. So there is a call for a change to these SDLT 3% surcharge and reform it in a way that is better and more fairer. And I thought this was a pretty good opening. By the way, I have to let you know that this is not the only article that talks about the SDLT surcharge. In fact, that's now the new trend. Now, in the last couple of months, it's all been about limited companies and, you know, should you buy a property in a limited company or should you not? Should you keep it in your own name? Big debate. You know, depending on your circumstances, that's a video for another day. But what was really interesting is that it was moved to this now whole new thing of SDLT. Interesting enough, a really brilliant article came through the Property Investor today. And by the way, all these articles I'm talking about tonight with you, I am going to be putting in the description box below, so you can have a look at that at your own leisure. And I'll put all the sources, the URLs, a bit of description on what it's all about as well. So feel free, if you haven't watched this video or you're watching it and you're thinking, well, I wouldn't mind seeing this bit more, don't worry, I will be putting these links into the description box after this session is over. But interesting enough, this brilliant article, it's a fantastic article, probably one of the best articles I've read in this decade. Yes, that's saying something, in this decade. And it's buy to let property investment, is it worth it in 2019? And it just starts about with the UK growing population, supply for housing is no longer being met by the demand is not going to be met by the supply because of the number of landlords that are fleeing the market. And therefore, poor old tenants that wish to rent out property can't get it. And interesting enough, what this article talks about is the pros and cons of property investing and the cost of investing in property as well. So really good article. And just weirdly, I'm going to zoom into this. Oh, wow. Oh, that's me. Okay. So that's by Optimise Accountants, not just by me, Simon Misiewicz. So have a read of that. It's a really good article, like I say. I'm not blowing my own trumpet. Clearly I'm there, but do have a read of it. It's really interesting, just a different dynamic instead of property tax as a whole. The Express is next up on our little agenda. And this talks about stamp duty news calls for cuts in stamp duty has homes crisis spiral. And in this particular article, it talks about Boris Johnson, again, his debate whether he will reduce the SDLT. He also talks about London as well. So capping the SDLT rates from 12% to 7%. Will that go ahead? What do you think? Do you think Boris Johnson will finally cut the rate of SDLT, which is the top band of 12%? Do you think he'll cut that down to 7%? Especially for those that are buying properties in London, which I think is huge in terms of these costs. So what do you think in terms of those changes? Will Boris make the change? And indeed, will he reduce the 3% SDLT surcharge altogether? Because his worry is that there's no movement really for people wanting to upstick, buy a smaller home or indeed buy a bigger home. There's just not enough movement. And therefore, there's got to be some change. And Boris Johnson has obviously identified that as a key thing. So watch your space, really, is what I'm saying here. Another one by Estate Agent Today, another great article. They do quite a few of these. 3 key tasks for the new ministers to consider. And I've highlighted just this one, really. So the majority of housing talks at Boris Johnson's appointments is centered around stamp duty. Have you been picking up a trend here that there really is this whole thing about changing stamp duty, please, because I think we're all sick and tired of this SDLT. We've got to make some changes, and maybe Boris is the man to do it. Wait and see, but what are your thoughts? Do you think we are going to see these SDLT changes, or do you think it's just more news without really substance? Drop a comment with your thoughts on that one. By association, so yet again, by association is right in there with my article list to review. I'm not sponsoring these guys, but I don't think I've done a webinar once, not once, have I kind of not mentioned their name. They've always been in my list. They're great, really good articles, I've got to be honest. So Samantha Taylor this time around. But basically, again, this is now focusing on capital gains tax, so changes have been made. And these guys are citing the capital gains tax changes from April 2020. Let's not forget, April 2020 is what, 10 months away, 11 months away, something like that. It's not far away. And we are going to see some big, big changes. So the first change is we are going to have a reduction of private residency relief from 18 months to 9 months. Pretty much the lettings relief that you know is likely to, well, it's changed, but in my view, it's almost been scrapped because you can only get lettings relief whilst the tenant lives in the property at the same time. When is that going to happen? So that's pretty much been got rid of. And obviously with CGT rates, it's 28% for high rate taxpayers, not 20%. And you've also got this 18% for basic rate taxpayers. Worse still, we are going to find ourselves where the conveyancing solicitors will be calculating your CGT liability. That'll be interesting because they will be risk averse. So they will be trying to push up the amount of CGT, and then you need to claim it back on your self-assessment tax return. Not a good place to be in, unfortunately. What other things? Mortgage strategy. Now, I did say I wasn't going to talk about other things other than property tax, but here I am. I've gone straight to mortgage strategy. And the only reason for it, ladies and gentlemen, is because yet again, we are seeing that there's another source pleading with Boris Johnson to reduce the SDLT from 12% to 7%. So just another form of echoing that we are finding going on. Here's one. This is a debut. This is the first time I think I've ever really come onto these guys. This is a website called Mansion Global. Their article talks about UK rental market reaches boiling point as demand outweighs supply, echoing what I said in my article, interestingly enough. Not that I'm trying to pick my own article up, but there's commonality here. I kind of, by the way, I've noticed that there's dollars as well as pounds on this website. So I think it's a transatlantic kind of perspective because they're pretty much focusing on dollars in terms of other things. But anyway, the one thing they did talk about is the fact that we have got this whole thing, and it's mentioning Boris Johnson again. Will the housing stock increase? And we are seeing the fact that pricing people out of London, but the thing that we're picking up here is international investors will not be priced out market because of the currency exchange. But just another article just talks about the fact that demand is there, but supply won't be there because UK landlords being pushed out of the market. But I think it will be filled in again by international investors who are buying property in this country with a better exchange rate than ever before. So I rather suspect we're going to have this foreign competition going on, buying property inside a limited company. So we're not going to get away from it at all, unfortunately, into that amount of competition. So we're now pushing out the UK landlords, bringing in international ones yet again. So that's pretty much my take of in the news this week. So what's your highlights, guys? Do you have any questions? Make sure you type those into the question box, and I will make sure that I get to those in just a few moments. Let's talk about the next section now, which is the client's FAQ. So this is where I'm going to take you to yet another document. And what I'm going to do is take you to my Word document, wherever that is. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. Okay. So these are questions that our clients have been asking. And what I thought I'd be doing is just sharing some of those insights with you. So the first question that came up, interesting enough, was a client that is based in Hong Kong. He's a paid tax course. He's not really a client of ours. It's just a, can I get some advice from you? I'll pay you for your time, and then I'll leave with comfort and confidence, which is the two things I always say. Now, we know that 3% SDLT surcharge always applies to second homes. The interesting thing about the analysis that we're doing with this client is if you are from Hong Kong and you don't have a home in the UK, but you want to start your buy-to-let property investments, technically speaking, if you buy it in your own name, that's the first property that you will have. And therefore, the 3% SDLT surcharge does not apply to that property, even though it's a buy-to-let. Interesting. So if you're buying a first property in your own name and it happens to be a buy-to-let, who cares? You're not going to be paying the 3% SDLT surcharge. However, there was a slight difference because this particular client in Hong Kong wanted to buy properties in a limited company. Unfortunately, the fact is that if you're buying a property inside a limited company, you will be paying 3% SDLT surcharge as normal. So there's no change there. You will have to pay that surcharge. I want to pick up with the fact that you will pay the 3% surcharge if you do have a home. But again, you can sell that property within kind of 36 months of buying the new home. So you've got your new home, you've paid 3% surcharge on, you've kept your existing home. But if you sell it within 36 months, then you can claim it all back. Now, I will suspect that that 36 months will likely be reduced. And that's reduced my perception on that 36 months, which is if you sell your property, your existing property, which is considered your old home, within 36 months, you can claim it back. The reason why I think that's going to be reduced is because they've reduced the CDT, private residency relief. And albeit these taxes aren't always connected, I think for landlords it technically is. So will we see a reduction of this allowance? Only time will tell. One thing I did pick up on is the 3% on chattels. If you are buying a property that has got chattels, now chattels, by the way, are items like fixtures and furniture, carpets, curtains. I'm not sure why I put it up for carpets. The carpets, that's right, they are normally on the floor. And then you've got curtains on the side, and then you've got lampshades. You might be buying the furniture of the people that own the property. If you're doing that, then those items are not subject to stamp duty land tax. So therefore, you could reduce the amount of SDLT on those items. You do need to speak to your solicitor and maybe a tax specialist more about these details, but it's worth doing so. Another question, it always comes up, to be fair, this is quite common now, is should I use a limited company when I'm starting in property? Or indeed, should I be buying my next property inside a limited company? It is such a common question. I'm sure my guys are getting a bit bored of it. But I think it does depend on your situation. And you can read this text that I'm sharing with you, by the way. But from my perspective, I think it really does depend. How long are you going to be in your current financial position? For high rate taxpayers, they are jumping over the bandwagon to get into a limited company structure. But we are seeing quite a few clients that are saying, well, I want to buy and get into a property only for me then to sell those property, remove my job, and I will live off the income from my property portfolio. Well, if that's the case, maybe using a limited company wasn't the most sensible thing because you paid more mortgage interest rate costs inside a limited company. You've also got the accountancy costs, you've got the administration of that limited company, which you may or may not have really needed. So my view is really start to plan ahead with your structure and then proceed with whatever investments you are looking to do. So that's my take on that. I won't go into the holding company structure. I just really want to focus on the limited company side. The other question that came up was using partnerships. Now, partnerships came about because people talked about using partnership structure like the Ramsays to incorporate their property portfolio into a limited company. And what was interesting out of that analysis was this whole use of the partnership. Now, partnership technically, it follows the law of Partnership Act 1890. And the governance around that case, or that particular law, I should say, is that you're two or more people, clearly, if you're a partnership, right? And you're in it to make a profit. That's sensible. And you manage the business activities. Now, this is where people might come to stumble, because there are lots of people out there that are using a letting agent. And therefore, if you're using a letting agent and not managing the tenants yourself, you may be seen from HMRC, not maybe, you pretty much will be seen as an investor rather than a business person. Why is this so important? Well, because the way that the Ramsay case was built in terms of incorporation, which I'm not necessarily going to get into too much detail about incorporation. I'm just using this for partnerships because I think there's some great tax advantages here. In as much as the fact that they was deemed to be a business was because they was working 20 hours or more per week on the property business itself, which basically means they was doing some of the refurb work themselves, they was collecting money from tenants, they were dealing with some of the refurb project management, they was getting tenants themselves, you name it. They was doing all the things that you might expect a letting agent to do. So they was managing that activity and therefore deemed to be a business. Now, if that's the case, and if it indeed it obviously was the case, but if that's the case from a perspective of a partnership, then could there be a tax advantage of using a partnership whereby you've got two or more people in business managing a portfolio without necessarily having to incorporate their property portfolio? And I had to scratch my head on this one, but I kind of think there is, because you could have husband and wife forming a partnership, managing a property portfolio, managing the tenants, etc., and you can devise it whereby you say, okay, well, I'm going to pay husband or wife a salary to manage these properties, and they take their money out of the property portfolio, and whatever left, we'll agree a partnership profit split. And we'll agree that, and we'll document that in terms of our legal paperwork, etc., which I would say you need to do, by the way. If you are going to do this, make sure you use a good solicitor, maybe like Sam Hawkins, who will be drafting that Partnership Act 1890 document, and then you can use that. Now, what it means is that you can pretty much not manipulate the tax situation here, but you have a lot more freedom to change the property splits rather than where if you've got properties in your own name, you've got some properties in both of your names, or so you've got a variety of ownership of a property, and you're having to use deed of trust to reconfigure stuff. Actually, that's quite messy. So using a partnership structure may well be a good avenue, even though you're not looking to incorporate. So that's going to be an interesting point as we develop and go through. Another question that came up was the use of, and this is another one where solicitors got this wrong. So again, not having a go, but it's a killer when you are arguing law from a tax accountancy perspective with a solicitor, because they always feel that they know the law, but inevitably they don't. And that's just a real sad fact. I'm not on a hungry horse here, but I think it's just a bit of a sad fact that we've got to have this battle, and we have to have these constant emails, which is really frustrating the client. And sometimes the client, I'm sure, feels that we're not doing our job properly. But anyway, I'm not going to go into that. This is a particular situation whereby you've got a property freehold. You wish to divide it up into flats, or indeed flats and a shop, whichever you may be changing it from one building, one freehold, and then creating leases out of that. You might wish to be selling them on. Now, by doing that, what you're aiming to do is keep the leases where they are. So if the freehold is in the limited company or in your own name, that's where it stays. What you need to do is create a freehold which cannot stay within the same entity. So you do need to move that out. And that freehold ordinarily could go to another limited company because it would be a limited management company. And it provided that it's £1,000, let's say, a value of the freehold, there is no SDLT surcharge. There's no SDLT charge, full stop. So this is whereby soliciting really got upset by this because they're saying, well, we've said £1, by the way, for the freehold. But they got really upset because they said, well, there should be an SDLT liability because you've created leases. And I'm like, no, that's not the way SDLT works. SDLT is based on a transfer of or beneficiary entitlement to land and buildings, not just because you created leases and you left them where they are. The fact that you transferred the freehold at £1 does not trigger an SDLT liability. And unfortunately, we had a bit of a debacle on this particular case. I think it was about £8,000 that we talked about here. And we had to get Sam, funny enough, involved to prove that what we were saying was right. It was a crazy, frustrating time, but at least it saved that client £8,000, right? So that's worth it. VAT basics, a couple of things that have been coming up recently is VAT. I know I've been on a property course, or I've bought a car, or I've got a major refurb and I've spent a lot on VAT. Can I claim it back, basically? And the answer is, well, residential rent is exempt. So typically I would say, no, none of the VAT that you've paid out can be claimed back because you're not charging out a VATable service to your tenants. Your your rent is exempt, so there's no VAT to your account. So therefore, I would suggest that you cannot claim back VAT. Now, one thing I would say on this, though, is that there are ways to reduce VAT from 20% to 5% on certain types of development projects that you're taking on board. And indeed, there are some ways of reducing VAT from 20% to 0%. But this is not, again, where you claim back the VAT. This is just where you are charged by invoice by your suppliers. So if you're doing some development work as listed down there, and I will put a link in this box up here eventually once I've processed this video, so that you can have a look at that more detail. But ultimately, it's about saving 15% VAT. Now, again, you're not claiming back the VAT, you're simply being charged a reduction in that rate. Holiday lets, let's give those a little mention. We haven't spoken about holiday lets for at least a week. So holiday lets, you will be subject to VAT once your turnover for that holiday let has exceeded £85,000. Now, if you've got 10 holiday lets, that means that on average, £8,500 per property times it by the 10 does mean you have a VATable registration requirement. It means that you'll have to charge your guests 20% VAT, which they may or may not be able to claim back. So you do need to think about that, depending on the type of client you're servicing. And you will then have an option to go with a flat rate VAT at 10.5%, which can be discounted to 9.5% for the first year. And again, I've got a link about that up here, so feel free to look at that a bit more detail. But that's pretty much all that was talked about in the news and indeed the client FAQ as well. So hopefully you found that useful. If you did, then drop in your comments in the comments box below this video. And again, I will try and answer those questions or comments. And if you found this video useful so far, then give me a thumbs up because that would be greatly appreciated. And it will allow me to kind of do these sessions more often. So what I'm going to do now, actually, I'm just going to take a drink, if that's okay. So let's talk about now the YouTube FAQ. So this is whereby you get to ask your questions now. So what I'm going to do is take my screen off, and I'm not going to do a share now. I'm just going to stop the share, and hello, here I am in full blaze of glory. And I'm going to go back to our video channel and just have a look at what's going on. So good to see that there's quite a few questions. We're not into double digits in terms of how many people watching, which is a real shame. Last week we had 15. Is it holiday season? I bet it is. Oh, holiday stays. So let's have a look at the questions that you've said. You retracted a message. I wonder why, because you've done that twice. So if you do have a sincere question, then feel free to ask that, and I will make sure I will answer it as best as I can. Let's just go to, Phil Sava, a new client of ours. Hi, Phil. Hope you're well on this fine Monday evening. I will get to the question. I'm just struggling with the scrolling. Wow, it's a great name. Fergal. Hopefully I've said your name right. I'm a bit blind, so I'm going to have to zoom in just so I can read these better. Oh my gosh, I've lost the kind of questions now. So Fergal's asked the question. Sorry, technical issues. I said, if you inherit a residential property and sell the property, say for 100K, is the full 100K less CGT exemption liable to CGT as there was no acquisition cost? That's a great question. Typically, if you sell a property that's been subject to IHT, then there will be a reduction to that CGT liability. So you have got the CGT liability that happens. So if you sold it and you make no profits, so let's say that you inherited a property at £200,000. You sell it for £210,000, meaning you make £10,000 worth of profit. That £10,000 only would be subject to CGT because the rest of it is already being charged to IHT, well, potentially. So that £10,000, if you made a profit, you would have that covered as part of your CGT annual allowance. And if you're husband and wife, or even if you've got it in your own name, you could do some nice jiggery pokery to change the ownership from one person to another and have that CGT offset altogether. And don't forget, I mentioned a link about CGT previously, so do have a look at those links because I think that will be quite useful for you to have a look at, especially for that. Phil's asked the question. I think he'll move the 3% SDLT for homeowners, but not for buy to let, unfortunately. And I kind of think you're right, but the problem is, Phil, how will they ever police it? Because everyone could say, well, I'm buying this for my home. It's not a buy to let, and guess what? They let it out. So it's going to be a difficult one to police, I've got to say, but let's wait and see. Lee Moffitt asked the question, when should one consider setting up an LLP structure? I'm not a fan of LLP structures, so never is my opinion. I don't really like them. I don't really agree with LLPs. I think a partnership structure is sufficient for you. You don't need to use an LLP. An LLP, I'm going to get on my high horse. Yeah, let's get on here now. So an LLP has the devilment of two things, okay? First of all, you have a LLP, which is a limited liability partnership. Limited liability, yes, it mitigates you from risk, but so does a limited company. The difference is you've got no tax benefits. An LLP basically is in your name and it's taxed on you as though you're an individual. The partnership's profits are split. You still get taxed on your LLP profits in your personal names, depending on your partnership share. But you still got all these accountancy costs. So you've got this company structure, which you're paying for this company, but you're not getting the tax benefits. LLPs, not a fan. I know there are a lot of people out there that love LLPs because why would they be there if there's no advantages to them? But every advantage I can see bigger advantages using just a normal limited company structure, if I'm honest. So don't mean to be on my high horse, but I am, and I've just got off again. So Vergard's asked the question of Vergard, it is, wow, sorry, it's my eyesight, I thought it was mine. So Vergard is asked the question for a partnership receiving rent as its turnover. If you sell a property, is this trading sale subject to income tax or CGT? Well, put it this way, if you've got a property that is deemed to be an investment because you've collected rent at some point in the past, then it will be an investment, capital gains tax applies. If you've had a property and you didn't rent it out at all, then it will be deemed to be an investment and it'd be subject to income tax if you've had it in your own personal name. Now, you did say for a partnership. Now, a partnership, let's not forget, is still in your own name. So it'll still be subject to normal standard personal income tax rules and standard normal CGT rules. There is no real difference on that one. But the question is more around the property. And therefore, I would say that if you are going to sell that property, well, you've got to think about, well, what was the intention around that property? Was you there to try and rent it out? Or was you there just to kind of have it as an investment, as a flip? And if it was a flip, you're always better, in my opinion, to do that inside of a limited company. But that's a question we can point for another day. Louise Whitley's asked the question, and good evening, Louise. Hi, I asked last week about rent to rent. Apologies if I've not come back to you. So I asked last week, I've been warned, I should have answered your question, and apologies for not doing so. I asked last week about rent to rent from my limited company to my sole traders, but there's no one. If I said to a management contract, 10%, is this a different situation? No, Louise, unfortunately, if you're using a limited company structure simply to move income from your own personal name, which is where the properties are held, into a limited company, that will be covered by GAR, stands for General Anti-Abuse Rules. No, not allowed. So we used to promote that scheme, right? But not anymore. So don't do it. It's not something that I would advise you do. Oh, okay. I had answered that. You answered live last week. Perfect. Well, I've answered it twice. Okay. So hopefully that's giving you some sort of consistency, and hopefully that's helped. So listen, guys, has this been useful so far? Has it been enjoyable? Has it been entertaining? Please give me a thumbs up, because the more you do that, the more it promotes our page. And if I can get more and more people out there to ask questions, because there's more and more people on the live chat, then it would be far better for you again as well, because you can be listening out to me. I'm going to go over now to my other share for now. And what I'm going to do is, okay. So thank you ever so much for asking questions. If you do have any more questions, I will be firing those anyway. But in the meantime, what I thought I'd do is, obviously next week, I will be here again at 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Now, last week, I talked about, thank you ever so much for the 1,000 subscribers. And what I said was I was going to promote or deliver a property course, which would be YouTube Live. And I just thought, do you know what? I love these sessions. I like to run these a bit more often. So Monday night really works. I don't want to lose that. So what I'm going to do instead is we've decided to run a property tax workshop using Teachable. Now, Teachable is a platform. We are going to create some property tax related workshops inside of that. So a bunch of videos, bunch of YouTube videos, some templates for you to use, and some insights in terms of property tax. And we'll also throw in there these live sessions so people can watch these at any time. So it gives you one place, a portal. And we're going to do some of these for free. Now, we are going to do a chargeable service. Clearly, we're here to make money. I'm not going to be doing this just for charity, and I'm sure you appreciate that. I'm hoping you've got some good insights from this free session. It's not cost you anything. But this, I thought, would be a better platform, and not to replace this one, by the way, but to replace the YouTube Live property tax workshop that I promoted last time around. So I'm going to build this for September. So I'm going to mention it again next week. But come September, I will give you guys the link in terms of going onto this, so you can watch all the other YouTube videos that we've ever done before. And then we can talk about, well, here's a course that I think you should be using. And I'm going to do one which is about getting started in property. And what I'm going to do in there is have 10, 15 videos which will be free to you as a way of saying thank you for the 1,000 subscribers. I'm going to give that to you for free. So look forward to that. I've got to develop a lot more content. Yeah, remains straight away. But hopefully that's going to be useful for you, and you know, it'll be entertaining as much as anything else. So that's pretty much me done, and that's pretty much all I've got now then. So thank you ever so much. Give me a thumbs up, guys, to say, you know, you've liked this video. Otherwise, there's 10 people watching and I've only got 3 likes. So that's 3 out of 10. That's 30%. That sucks, really. That kind of tells me that it's rubbish and I should just give up. So if you don't mind, do give me a thumbs up. Do share this for next week, because we'll be doing this again next Monday at 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. I'm looking at time now. It's 10 to 8. So we're finishing early tonight. That's because I don't have that many questions. So let's get this out there more. Share it, please, if you don't mind, that this event's going to happen next week. And also, just whilst we're talking of which, what I'm going to do is, before you go, there is something else I want to share with you. So do stick around for a second. I'm going to go into my desktop. This is going to really screw things up. But what I want us to do is Optimise Accountants YouTube videos. Okay, let's just go. There is a couple of things I want you to bear in mind, all right? So the first one, he says, desperately trying to get there. Okay, videos, here we are. So there's a couple of videos that's coming up on Thursday. This Thursday, we've got the charging interest on a director's loan to a limited company. Did you know if you had a director's loan account, you could charge yourself interest, as in the limited company, which would reduce corporation tax and you get tax-free income? Did you know that? Well, watch that video on Thursday. That'd be a cracker. The following Thursday, which I've just, funnily enough, promoted, was this one, single let or HMO. Which buy-to-let property strategy should you follow? And interestingly enough, I've taken insights from my good friend, Tony Law, who writes, has got this other YouTube video, which you should watch after this one, called Your First 4 Houses. And he talks about HMOs and single lets. And I took some snippets, kind of redone them from my perspective in terms of the tax side of things. So watch that video. That's a week on Thursday. So I'm probably going to promote it again later on anyway. And that brings me to a close. So thank you ever so much, I would say. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. So until then, thank you and good night. Bye-bye. By the way, I can't get off this screen. Never mind. I shall see you again Monday.